You can surround a guy with 20-foot walls of reinforced concrete. You can watch him with armed snipers, seismic sensors, and biometric scanners. But none of that matters when a prisoner has $1 billion and a shovel. We build modern prisons to be mathematically impossible to escape, but time and time again, the world's most dangerous men prove the math wrong. They don't just do it by picking a lock. They do it by breaking the physical and psychological limits of the building itself. Over the next hour, we are tearing down the illusion of maximum security. We are looking at cartel kingpins who dug right under their guards' boots, and men so violently unhinged that other murderers begged to be kept away from them. And eventually, we have to go back to the rock of Alcatraz, because we have to figure out what actually happens when a desperate human brain goes up against an immovable concrete wall. I'm Josh, and this is the Infographic Show.
Men freeze in place, holding pickaxes and shovels at the ready inside a well-lit tunnel under the Mexican countryside. They can hear the vibrations of a vehicle above them and, wary of making any noise that might give them away, hold their work as the prison patrol passes overhead. 30 feet below the prison's main yard, there's little chance of being discovered. But after several months of secret tunneling, they can't take any chances, especially when they are so close to their goal. The prison cell of Mexico's most famous drug kingpin, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. For months, they've tunneled through solid rock with nothing more than pickaxes and shovels, moving as fast as they can with their limited equipment but with great caution. The work would go much faster if they could use modern tunnel digging equipment like jackhammers and boring machines. But not only would that create noise that might give them away, it would draw a great deal of attention to their staging area, just a mile from the prison perimeter. Prior to tunnel digging, El Chapo's powerful drug cartel purchased a small plot of land as close to the prison as they could get and began constructing 2 small homes as a cover for their real intentions. The homes never made it past a rough brick outer shell though, because of course they would not be inhabited. Instead, they provided the cover needed to start construction on the tunnel that would set El Chapo free. But the tunnel crew was facing incredible pressure to finish as quickly as possible. Due to his history of escaping from prison and evading police raids, Mexican authorities could at any time transfer El Chapo to another prison in order to foil any possible escape attempts. Every day the tunnelers took to get their boss was another day the entire thing could be for nothing, and a new escape attempt in a completely different location would have to be devised. But that's not all. The unfinished buildings were beginning to draw attention from local officials and curious villagers alike. Why would someone start construction on an empty piece of land and then suddenly stop with only a shell of a home built? Time was running out and pressure was mounting. Inside his cell, El Chapo was the model prisoner. Despite his long history of ordering some of the most horrific violence Mexico has ever seen, El Chapo maintained a cordial and even pleasant attitude with his prison guards and fellow inmates. His conversations over the phone were carefully monitored, his mail checked by prison officials, but not a single hint of the ongoing plot was ever revealed. El Chapo was a true professional by now and patient, but his patience was running out. The tunnel diggers faced a daunting task from the start, and they knew they had to move fast. Despite the incredible pressure on them, however, they managed to not only reach El Chapo before any potential prison transfer, but they wound up breaking through to El Chapo's cell just 16 months into his prison stay. The tunnel they constructed was sophisticated, impressing officials who would later remark that a tunnel of that magnitude should have taken 18 months to 2 years to construct. Its walls were reinforced when needed, with wooden paneling, and a generator pumped fresh air through a mile-long ventilation system to keep the tunnel oxygenated. On the ground, the tunnelers had laid down rails and used a motorcycle to shuttle 2 carts, which were filled with dirt back and forth along the shaft. Once El Chapo was reached, he would ride on that same motorcycle and quickly shuttle the mile distance to freedom. All that dirt, though, had to go somewhere, and so the tunnelers cleverly transferred it to the tunnel opening, where others would spread the dirt around on the field outside, rather than dump it in giant piles, which would no doubt draw attention. Still, the presence of fresh dirt littering acres of empty fields was sure to eventually draw attention, and questions that would not be easy to answer for the fake construction crew above ground. Suddenly though, in the middle of the night on July 12, 2015, the sound of metal scraping came from El Chapo's shower inside his cell. Moments later, the ceramic bottom of the shower popped free, and a friendly face greeted the imprisoned drug lord, beckoning him into the darkness below. Wasting no time, El Chapo ducked into the secret tunnel, climbing down 30 feet into a tunnel only as wide across as a man. but just tall enough for El Chapo to stand upright. Often derided for his short stature by his enemies, the tunnel diggers had made sure that the tunnel was just tall enough so the boss wouldn't have to hunch as he walked along it. A classy prison escape if we ever heard of one. A few feet into the mouth of the tunnel, El Chapo boarded a small motorcycle which had been affixed to metal tracks. The carts full of dirt that had pushed along for months now were gone, and just moments after leaving his cell, El Chapo was cruising along the well-lit tunnel like a kid on an amusement park ride. 2 minutes later, El Chapo ended his joyride by climbing up wooden steps and popping up into the empty shell of a home his crew had been secretly working from for a year and a half. Changing into clean clothes, El Chapo then climbed onto a truck and whisked away into the dark of the night, leaving behind an incredible mile-long secret tunnel and completely frustrated prison system and Mexican government both. El Chapo would be caught again just months after his escape, after his newest safe house was given away weeks before his arrival by careless gunmen who were spotted by locals. Responding to reports of heavily armed men, Mexican officials put the house under surveillance and intercepted communications saying that grandma or aunt was coming to visit. Realizing this had to be a high-value target, officials waited for their chance to strike. 1 month later, Mexican Special Forces soldiers raided the home and killed several bodyguards, but El Chapo and one of his most senior lieutenants escaped via, you guessed it, a secret tunnel. Popping up a mile from the home, the two stole a vehicle at gunpoint, though the driver immediately reported it to the police. After issuing an alert for the stolen vehicle, the federal police officers discovered the stolen car and placed the two fugitives under arrest. El Chapo, however, wouldn't go without at least trying to buy his freedom. Knowing how easily corruptible public officials had been in the past, El Chapo bribed the police officers, offering them money, homes, and even lucrative jobs if they let him go. Little did the desperate kingpin know, however, that he was dealing with a brand new brand of Mexican police officer, one not as easily corrupted as his predecessors. All 4 officers refused El Chapo, after which his offers of honey turned into vinegar, telling the police officers that they were all going to die. The 4 officers sent pictures to El Chapo to their superiors, only to be warned that the police had received a tip-off that 40 heavily armed assassins were en route to free El Chapo. With friendly forces still tied up at the compound, the officers were ordered to a nearby motel on the outskirts of town, where they holed themselves up in an empty room and prepared for a possible shootout for their lives. All the while, El Chapo laughed, echoing his previous threats. Suddenly, a convoy of vehicles lit up the roadside, clearly headed for the lonely motel. The officers, armed with M16 assault rifles and pistols, prepared for what was surely their last stand. El Chapo taunted them, telling them they were about to face death, and after them, their families. Yet the officers held their ground, ready to die for duty's sake if need be. As the vehicles began to turn into the parking lot, however, El Chapo's taunts died in his throat. Once the glare of the headlights faded, the barricaded officers could see military trucks full of Mexican Marines rushing to take up defensive positions around the motel. Minutes later, a thoroughly defeated and dejected-looking El Chapo was dragged into an SUV and rushed off to an airfield. El Chapo would not escape from Mexican prison again, and 2 years later, any hope of ever escaping again would be extinguished as Mexico approved an extradition request to the United States. Safely in U.S. custody, El Chapo faces life in prison, and though he may have been one of the deadliest men in Mexico's history, the drug kingpin would ultimately be remembered as nothing more than a sobbing mess as he begged U.S. justice officials for leniency, which they would not grant. If you've already seen the 2008 movie Bronson, about Britain's so-called most notorious prisoner, don't worry. That rather theatrical piece of cinema didn't tell you much about the man, so there's so much more to see today. You might be thinking that it's coincidental that a man with such a reputation has the same name as a former Hollywood tough guy, but he wasn't called that at birth. The name was acquired during his bare-knuckle boxing days. He was actually born Michael Gordon Peterson. Yep, that doesn't sound quite as fearful. There's a lot of controversy about this man, regarding whether he should have been in prison for so long or if prison is to blame for his often crazy behavior. We discuss this and more in this episode of The Infographic Show, Britain's most notorious prisoner, Charles Bronson. As you know, he was born with the name Michael. His birth date was December 6, 1952. He spent his first few years in Wales and then moved to Luton, which isn't too far away from the capital, London. It doesn't seem that he came from a rough and tumble background, given that his father ran a conservative club for a while and his aunt and uncle were a mayor and mayoress. His aunt actually once said this about him: as a boy, he was a lovely lad. He was obviously bright and always good with children. He was gentle and mild-mannered, never a bully. He would defend the weak. He might have defended the weak, but it seems his penchant for violence and crime started early in life. After he moved up north at the age of 13, it seems that that's when trouble started. At that age, he was charged as a juvenile for stealing, and it said he was part of a gang. He didn't much enjoy school and soon left to start working at an early age. His first job came when he moved back down to Luton. This was a very short 2-week stint working in Tesco supermarket. Apparently, he was fired for attacking his manager. After this, it seems, crime became second nature to young Michael. He got in trouble for criminal damage but got off with a fine and some probation. He had lots of jobs, mostly related to labor or factory work, and we're told he enjoyed nothing more than a good night out on the town, drinking gallons of beer and getting into fistfights with the locals. Easy to do in some areas of the UK. He likely wasn't short of foes on the mean streets of Luton. One of his jobs, we're told, was a circus strongman, so he was likely a hard man to fight. He got in trouble again after crashing a stolen lorry or a truck into another car, but again got off with just a fine as no one was seriously hurt. At this point, he is still in his teens. Yet again, he got into trouble, and at this time aged 19, when he was involved in a smash and grab, which is basically smashing a car into a shop front and getting as much as you can. Again, he got off with just a fine and a suspended sentence. Age 20, perhaps, he got his chance to join what is sometimes called the straight and narrow, as he met a girl and got married. But apparently, she quite liked his tough guy persona, his tailored suits, and the fact that he spoke in a Cockney accent. They had a child and called him Michael Jonathan Peterson. According to the British press, the son is very private and has never spoken publicly about his notorious dad, so we can't tell you much about him. Moving on, now 22, Michael was arrested for armed robbery, and at this time the judge came down hard. He got 7 years, but prison wasn't exactly a place he liked being, it seemed. During his first stint in prison in Liverpool, he attacked 2 other prisoners, and we're told he wasn't provoked. That got him time in solitary, something he would see much more of later. He was then transferred to prison in Hull, and again had issues with guards and prisoners. They gave him sedatives to calm him down, which apparently made him very ill. He also spent more time in isolation, and he was said to be a very difficult prisoner. On one occasion, he was out of solitary, he attacked a prisoner with a glass jug, and he was convicted of unlawful wounding. Yet again, he was moved, this time to the tough Armley jail in Leeds, a foreboding-looking place if you've ever seen one. So there he was, now serving time in what looks like a medieval castle. Even in 2018, the place is said to be the place with the highest rate of people taking their own lives. And in the press right now, it's said it's still very much an unsafe place for both prisoners and staff. Back in the 70s, it can't have been a holiday. But it seems he was too much for Armley, and he kept moving between a number of prisons, sometimes chained to the floor of the vans he traveled in. It's said if not in solitary, he would attack prisoners and guards. It's also said he incurred numerous vicious beatings from the guards after an attack. You might have seen that in the movie, which depicts these guards having to tackle him in numbers. During one time in solitary while recovering from a beating, he got divorced. We imagine this might have been a low point, but it's said that one thing that kept him going was his solitary workout routine, keeping him healthy and fearsome. His book, Solitary Fitness, which he wrote after many years inside, has sold millions of copies. Reviews are actually very positive, although people talk about how strange the book can get at times. Profits from the book, says the media, go to children's charities. The British press tells us that his strength was quite unbelievable. He once bent the cell bars with his own hands, and it's said he holds 6 world records for strength and fitness. Another unofficial record he has set is the most prison rooftop protests by any British inmates. But right now, we're still in the 70s and a long way from fame or infamy. While in prison in London, he tried to poison an inmate, and it seems that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Enough with prison, he was transferred to a psychiatric facility. But guess who he met there? 2 of Britain's most ruthless gangsters, the Kray twins. He called them the best 2 guys I ever met. That friendship didn't last long though, as he was moved back to prison. What followed was more solitary, escape attempts, attacks on prisoners that ended with lifelong scars, more attacks, and finally, when the authorities were sick and tired, he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. He was no longer just a criminal, but mentally ill. In 1978, he was again in another special facility, but it seems he didn't much like being forced to take medication and wasn't keen on the fact that he was surrounded by some of Britain's most disturbed people. Men who would never leave the facility because they had done things to people we will not talk about. Yep, he didn't like some of these terrible men, and at one point was said to be about 5 seconds away from killing a fellow patient or prisoner who had taken the life of an innocent child. In his own words, describing the people around him at the facility, "I witnessed them running into walls, using their heads as rams. I've seen them fall unconscious doing this. There was one who just kept trying to eat himself, biting his arms, legs, and feet. He tried to kill another prisoner, and then in 1982, when still in the notorious Broadmoor, he led a rooftop protest that lasted 3 days and caused around $300,000 worth of damage. Now you can see why this guy became well known as a hard-to-deal-with prisoner. But there was a lot more to come. He hadn't even started. He led 2 more rooftop protests and also went on a hunger strike, but in some ways he found solace in writing poems, sketching, and creating cartoon strips. He even won awards for his work. It didn't stop him being violent though, just settled him down from time to time. Psychiatrists couldn't figure him out, and even though he was in a mental facility, he was never properly diagnosed. He once said, "Asylums are crazy places with crazy rules. If you're not mad when you arrive, you are when you leave." Again, he was moved from facility to prison, stabbing inmates, hitting others. More rooftop protests, more isolation, more beatings from the guards, more medicine, and perhaps his piece de resistance, he once strangled a prison governor. After that, he was not allowed out of isolation until he finished his sentence. He got out of prison in 1987 and almost immediately turned to crime. Although his first offense was quite comical, he bought a water pistol and modified it a bit, after which he forced a man at Water Pistol Point to drive him to Luton, his favorite spot. There, he started bare-knuckle fighting and earned the nickname Charles Bronson. He actually legally changed his name to this. Was this the start of a life on the outside? Not a chance. It's written that he would fight anyone and even challenged the king of bare-knuckle fighting, Lenny McLean. It seems Lenny wanted no part of him, or at least when he agreed to fight, it was too late as Bronson was back in prison. In another fight, he was challenged to go against a large Rottweiler. He killed it and said later in life that he really regretted that. It was cash in hand though. He was only out of prison months and was back inside again for armed robbery. We won't go into details, but he fought again, attacked prisoners, guards, and had more time in solitary, was moved and moved and moved, and occasionally tried to start riots. In 1989, he was attacked himself, stabbed in the back several times, but he recovered. He wouldn't tell the police anything about his attackers. In 1992, he got out for the grand total of 53 days. He was jailed but got off. Then he was arrested again for having a shotgun and conspiracy to rob. It gets crazy here, because while on the remand, he took a librarian as a hostage. While negotiating with police, he had 3 demands: an inflatable doll, a helicopter, and a cup of tea. Yep, you heard that right. He was given 8 years despite saying the gun was to blow off his own head. It wasn't the first time he had contemplated taking his own life. He was difficult again, transferred from prisons, and at times was left naked for many days on end in dark isolation. At one point, he was put in the worst spot in any prison in the UK, something called the Hannibal Cage, that had been created for another prisoner who had once killed inmates and was said to have spooned out one person's brain and eaten it. Even though at one point he attacked a governor, it's said he got much better after being allowed to interact with handicapped children. He also kept up his cartoon sketching. These were the quiet times. They didn't last long. He endured more solitary, more moves, and then in one prison he took 2 Iraqi hijackers as hostage in his cell. It's said he was going crazy after losing his father. It's also said that he told the guards if they came close he would snap off the heads of his hostages. He made his hostages tickle his feet and demanded they sing songs to him. To them, he was known as the General. He demanded a plane, machine guns, ammunition, and a cheese and pickle sandwich. It seems later he just kept asking for ice cream. In the end, he let the hostages go and another 7 years were added to his sentence. While in great physical shape, it's said that all the time in darkness and solitary had negative effects on his eyes and his social skills, and lawyers now started to get on his side. It's a pity then that he took one of them hostage. He let him go quickly though, but after one civilian worker criticized his drawings, he took him hostage too, and then started ripping up parts of the prison. What else? Well, after the millennium, he got married again, converted to Islam, changed his name and took another hostage, wrote a book, sketched a lot, and then changed his name to Charles Arthur Charlie Salvador, out of respect for his favorite artist. The movie came out and he became a household name. Until then, not many people knew about him. Thousands of people around the world started to support him, saying even though he had been a bad boy, his incarceration had just gone on too long. But he couldn't stop messing up. In 2014, he attacked another governor. That same year, his artwork went up for auction, and his 200 pieces, often dark in nature, fetched around £30,000. Bronson donated a large part of this to the brain tumor charity and Keach Hospice in Luton. Bronson said the old him was now dead, and he was born again as the artist Salvador. He created more works too, donating to other charities and one-time Oxford's homeless. He also got married to an actress in 2017, and she's hoping to see him out soon. In total, out of the 44-plus years he served, 36 of them have been in solitary confinement, sometimes without light. In 2018, it was said that he is in open prison, but will have his case reviewed in 2 years and could get out. That might not happen though, as he's got a life sentence for one of his kidnappings. That was a teacher in 1999 that he held for 2 days. The British media reports that he allegedly smothered himself in butter, age 65, and challenged the guards to a fight. We'll leave you with something he once said: "I'm a nice guy, but sometimes I lose all my senses and become nasty. That doesn't make me evil, just confused."
It's August 11th, 1934, and along with 136 prisoners, you're on your way to what will become known as America's toughest prison. You guys are what the authorities have called the incorrigibles, because in the prisons where you've come from, you just couldn't stop causing trouble. All of you have been called violent and unpredictable, and so you're being taken to the penitentiary version of hell. You sit there on a specially designed train coach, handcuffed and surrounded by 60 FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and other security. The atmosphere is solemn, and each of you grisly-looking hardened criminals each eye each other with distrust. Every chug of the train is foreboding. In your mind, it says to you, "You're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell." You're not wrong. That's how the first shipment of prisoners traveled to Alcatraz Island. None of those guys were prisoner number one, since Alcatraz had some leftover army prisoners. This place has been a military prison before it became the penitentiary renowned as being an inescapable hellhole. Let's just pretend you were one of these prisoners again. You arrive on that train in a place called Tiburon at 9:40 a.m. A barge is waiting in the water there, and that's how you'll get to the island located in San Francisco Bay. The train carriage where you've been sitting could perhaps go down as one of the most well-guarded trains in the history of rail. Imagine if some of the USA's most violent prisoners all got loose, something akin to a movie about the Wild West. No one escapes this day. Many of the men around you are convicted killers, and others are notorious bank robbers. You can make a book out of your combined rap sheets. Each of these guys have been called an agitator, and the authorities have noted that the men are desperate. Most of them have planned prison escapes from other places, and it's well known that they will kill anyone who gets in the way of their freedom. For that reason, you'll be guarded by highly trained men, and when we say highly trained, we don't mean in rehabilitation. They are men that were chosen for their toughness, not their ability to help improve prisoners' behavior. The two men in charge, the warden and his assistant, have been nicknamed the Iron Men. When you finally get to the ferry ship that will take you to the island, you are handcuffed with another man, and both of you are shackled together. You're ordered to walk 10 feet forward and cross a gangplank, and then onto the ship. You're surrounded by law enforcement and prison guards. All this is happening without the press looking on, because the authorities have kept the operation a secret. Only one lone photographer got news of the move. At Alcatraz's dock, you and the guy you're chained to walk between rows of guards. 2 by 2, you're marched through the gate into the yard, and then into the cell house. You're searched and given a number, after which you're allocated a cell. Now your cuffs are removed and you are free of the other man. But before you can go into your cell, you're taken to the bathhouse and stripped naked. You're examined in every nook and cranny of your body, and then told you can wash. You're then taken to a cell and the door is locked. Outside is a sign that has your name and number. The authorities will later say that the entire operation went perfectly. Okay, so what does your cell look like? You're assigned to Block B. You might move to C later, and Block A, you'll learn, isn't used much at all to incarcerate men. D Block is solitary, a segregation center where a prisoner can be locked up 24 hours a day. These cells are sometimes referred to as confinement chambers. You might get let out in the yard for an hour once a week if you get on the right side of the guards, but other than that, you face total isolation if you're sent there. So your cell in Block B is 5 feet by 9 feet. Proverbially speaking, if you were to swing a cat in there, you'd kill it. Inside that cell is a cot that you can sleep on, and it's made out of steel. It folds against the wall when not being used because there really isn't that much space in the cell. There's a steel shelf to sit on and a steel shelf to put things on. There's also a basin and a toilet. Everything you own when you first get into that cell is a toothbrush, some tooth powder, 2 towels, and a cup. There will be books to read, so you can fill that shelf at some point. You will be able to get visits if you're good, but only once a month and non-contact. If you fall sick, then there's a hospital in the prison. Over the coming year, some big names will arrive at the prison, including the man known as George Machine Gun Kelly. Others that arrive have been convicted of what the press call most atrocious crimes. Alcatraz is called the end of the line, the last resort. It holds formidable robbers and ruthless murderers, and it especially holds anyone who has tried to escape from another prison, or a prisoner that has hurt or killed a prison guard where he was housed. Maybe the most famous criminals to stay on the rock is the mafia crime lord Al Capone. He actually arrives shortly after you. So there you are, sitting in your cell. You receive a booklet, and it's called Regulations for Inmates USP Alcatraz. It tells you that what you have right now is what you're entitled to. The clothes on your back, the roof over your head, and some bathroom items. Anything else you might receive is a privilege, and to get more things you'll have to show good conduct and a good work ethic. You might even get some time taken off your sentence. But show bad conduct and the opposite might happen. You might lose privileges, get some time added on, or be sent to those isolation cells. This is nothing you haven't read before. In bold letters, the booklet tells you that there will be no trading, gambling, selling, giving, or loaning. They mean this too. You will work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. The rest of the time will be recreation time and cell time. You can watch a movie twice a month, and if you show good conduct, you'll be able to go out to the yard and play handball. You're also told that this won't happen just yet, since your first 30 days will be spent in your cell. This is called the quarantine period. It doesn't sound too bad, only you guess the guards will be stricter. That is very true. You'll wake up at 7 a.m. and you'll be counted. You must be absolutely silent during this time or you'll be disciplined. This rule of silence will be the thing that gets to you the most, and the guards are serious about it. You might have your own cell, but the silence kills you. You can try talking through the toilet bowl, but that will get you in serious trouble. You can talk when you eat with the other prisoners. The food at least isn't that bad. In fact, you're quite impressed with the chow. For breakfast one day, you get oatmeal, milk, sausage, fried potatoes, toast, and coffee. For dinner, you get some bean soup, roast beef, and veg. For your supper, you get pork and beans, salad, more coffee, and bread. On another day, the breakfast is similar, but dinner consists of breaded cod, potato chowder, cabbage bread, and tea. For supper one evening, you get vegetable soup, spaghetti and meatballs, fruit pudding and bread. They even throw in some spiced apples. What's going on? You're eating better than you did on the outside, and a lot better than the many Americans living in abject poverty. In the years to come, the delicious food at Alcatraz will become legendary, and it'll make any prisoner in the present day wish he was taken back in time as he chows down on his single slice of moldy bread and dubious slop filled with mystery meat and gristle. At Alcatraz, the wardens believe that healthy food and tasty food will lead to good behavior and cut down on violence. 3 good meals a day should keep the prisoner in good physical and mental health. You are what you eat, and your warden believes slop doesn't align with good behavior. Alcatraz is quite progressive in this respect. Okay, so you've got your pounded beef steak with gravy and mash, and you're not going to complain about that. The silence thing gets to you, but as you follow all the rules, you at least get time on the yard and books to read. It's a bit cramped in the cell, but at least you don't have to share with a man who has a history of atrocious violence. What can go wrong? Well, that routine is so strict that it can feel oppressive. It's final lockup at 4:50 p.m. and lights out at 9:30 p.m. And until the next day, you're not supposed to make a sound. A man named Edward Watke doesn't take to Alcatraz very well. He's prisoner number 47, and he's the first man to take his life in there. More will follow. There is bullying, of course, and this leads one man to severely hurt himself. He wants to get transferred because of the bullying he faces daily. So for you, as long as you don't get bullied, life could be okay. You just have to adhere to the strictest of routines. You even get to go to the library, and since you're eating well and exercising, you might actually get rehabilitated. In fact, as an average prisoner, you'll get to go through almost 100 books a year. As the years go by, you'll get the chance to use a musical instrument and listen to a radio. The problem is, what if you don't follow the rules? Well, that's when Alcatraz turns into Hellcatraz. Let's just add that it's very easy to break the rules. That code of silence is enforced with enthusiasm, and you also have to look presentable at all times. Your cell has to be spotless, and come rain or shine, you have to work really hard. There's no shirking at Alcatraz, and so you might say it's run in a zero-tolerance style. Now, with that in mind, the place is full of notorious criminals with problems of self-control. Things can go wrong. Let's say one day you just can no longer cope with the oppressive rules and you start talking at night and not cleaning your cell. You're sent to isolation, and then you do the same again. You hit out at people and talk back to guards. That's when you go to D block and get put in one of the cells from 9 to 14. This is known as the hole, and before you get thrown in there, you're stripped naked and beaten. The guards will come back and torture you now and again. You lie on a cold concrete floor and there is no light that comes into the cell. You can shower once a week, and you might get out in the yard for an hour in the week. The rest of the time is spent in that cold, dark cell, being treated worse than an animal. You're given no toothbrush or soap to clean yourself. At one point, a guard throws cold water on you. The cell stinks like a sewer, too, and you can forget about that tasty food. You're given 4 slices of bread a day, and then once a week you get a proper meal. In conclusion, Alcatraz is a foreboding place just to look at, and it comes with ruthless men who might bully and kill you. The food is good, but some men just can't cope with the rules. This is what one of your fellow inmates says about that. Men go slowly insane under the exquisite torture of restricted and undeviating routine. Men crack, and then they're punished, sometimes severely, and this happens a lot. The question is, will you crack or will you get through it? A 20-year-old man, a man who believes he has become a victim of the justice system in the US, wants out. In the psych ward where he's been placed, he bides his time until he sees his chance to get into a medical cabinet. The man has no problem picking locks. He'll pick many locks for many years to come. Inside that cabinet is a bottle of the extremely potent psychotropic substance called LSD. He takes the bottle of that, and again, when the time is right, he sneaks into the staff room and pours the entire bottle into a pot of boiling coffee. The incoming and outgoing staff are all gonna get a hit you could call heroic. In his own words, the man later said, "The plan was when all the people were freaked out enough, I was going to pick the locks and go." A few aides and staff on the ward between them unwittingly took acid to the amount of around 100 tabs. Perhaps you're not the type of person who knows much about things like LSD, but let us tell you, 100 tabs between a handful of people would have caused them to hallucinate wildly. The plan didn't exactly go how that guy wanted it to go. Far from it. Not long after those coffees were drunk, one aide was down in the basement watching the clothes dryer spin around and around. His pupils were now large black shimmering discs, and he stared at that spinning drum and just lost his mind. The machine became his mortal enemy. The aide screamed at the dryer, he threw punches at it, kicked it. While upstairs in the ward, people were tripping out of their minds. One of the female psychiatric doctors didn't seem to know where she was or who she was. She was seen madly dancing up and down the ward and, in a sexually suggestive way, informing the shocked inmates about how deliriously hot she was feeling. The scene was a phantasmagoria of horror and comedy. But during all that utter madness, the plotter and executor of that communal trip could not make his escape. Security was soon called and the staff were taken to some place to calm down from their mega trip. A clothes dryer had been ripped apart and, in one man's eyes, defeated. Welcome to the life of Mark DeFreist, the Houdini of Florida, a masterful escape artist, a veritable genius who just couldn't find his way in life. A life that from the outside might look part comedy, but in reality, his life sentence on this earth has been filled mostly with devastating tragedy. Mark was born in 1960 and grew up with his father and stepmom. His father had served during the Second World War in the OSS, an organization that would later evolve into the CIA. Father and son were close, and the former imparted his vast knowledge to the latter. This would serve Mark well in his many prison escapes. But the child was different. Some say he was a savant. Most others now say he was a high-functioning autistic, and still is today. Mark didn't understand much about the world and didn't socialize much with other kids. He spent most of his time by himself and he despised school. They moved him to a disciplinary boys' school to temper the child's waywardness, but he ran away, something he would keep doing his entire life. All he really wanted to do was take things apart and put them back together again. At the back of the house there was a workshop, something Mark would later call his Frankenstein's lab. There he would mess around with chemicals, blowing himself up on 2 occasions, and he would rewire appliances, take apart clocks, all with the skill and dexterity of a seasoned expert. His life fell apart when he was 19. His father died, and knowing what Mark loved most, he bequeathed all his tools to him. This was the start of the beginning of tragedy because Mark, not really knowing how wills work, took the tools before that will had been probated. That just means made valid. His cold and stony stepmother, a woman who had never cared for Mark, called the cops. Those cops chased Mark down one night, and on seeing those flashing lights, this young man who didn't quite get how things worked in society fled on foot. He had no idea why those cops were after him. He had no idea about how wills were supposed to be dealt with. He was arrested and charged with theft, and also got a charge for being in possession of a weapon. Next came jail.
This just didn't seem fair to the young man, a guy that thought he'd taken what was rightly his. One day after Bible study class, he and the other inmates were being led back to their cells when some men just started running for it, heading to the razor wire fence. None of them got over, but Mark knew exactly how to scale such a fence because his father once taught him how it could be done. Mark then hot-wired a car, hit the road, and settled into a motel for the night. This was his problem. He understood the technical aspects related to escape, but he didn't have the nous, the worldliness, the social intellect to evade the authorities for long. He got 6 more charges after that. He went back to jail, where he was jumped by 14 inmates who didn't quite understand this weird kid, who didn't fit in but wasn't afraid to talk back to them. Those 14 so-called tough guys beat him badly and sexually abused him. After that, Mark slit his wrists. He hit his head against the cell door. He screamed and shouted all day long, and soon he was taken to that psych ward where he would spike a coffee pot with an entire bottle of LSD. The prison system and the justice system thought that what they had was an unruly kid who'd been lucky to get over a razor wire fence. They didn't much like the inmate. He was troublesome, he used bad language, and he would often not do as he was told. For that, over the years, Mark would be beaten time and again by the guards. He had to escape, that's all he ever thought about. You have to see, in his mind, a mind that worked differently from most people's, he'd only taken his father's tools, and those tools had been given to him. The escapes, to Mark's reasoning, were not crimes, but the right thing to do. He was, in fact, just being very rational. Tools equal mine, imprisonment equals wrong, escape equals right. One day, he was asked if he'd like to join a new woodwork and arts crafts activity. Of course he would. This was a guy that was brilliant at making things, but when Mark saw rolled up copper sheets, the first thing that came to his mind was, they really mustn't want me to stay. That's because what he saw in the workshop were all the necessary bits and pieces to fashion a homemade gun, aka a zip gun. With the copper, he made the gun barrel, and then he fixed that to a homemade pistol grip. When he had the gun ready, the next thing he did was steal an ice pick and take that back to his cell. He took that spike and ripped out one of his back teeth. With blood streaming from his mouth, he called a nurse and he was rushed to the psych ward prison hospital, albeit in handcuffs and leg chains. The dentist knew right away that this was an act of self-mutilation, and that's what he added to his report. After seeing the dentist, Mark asked if he could go for a pee. In the bathroom, he picked his locks again and produced his homemade gun. Pointing his zip gun at the guards, he shouted, "Anybody move and I'll blow your brains out." Some inmates in that ward, perhaps not in good mental shape, started jumping around and screaming. Mark shot a table just to prove to them his gun actually worked. After that, he was gone again, out the door and running through the nearby woods. But again, he just didn't quite know how to stay out. He stole yet another car but was soon caught. He was now making the headlines of local news media. But the prison system, they were starting to get pretty mad at the kid. He'd had his chances, now they wanted him to suffer. And suffer he did, in jail, while the authorities tried to figure out if this kid was mentally fit to stand trial. They kept him locked down for 24 hours a day. Was he fit to stand trial? 4 psychiatrists said no. No way, he's mentally ill. This man doesn't know what's right or wrong. Sure, he understands the court system and he's not raving mad. In fact, he's obviously very talented, but still, he doesn't know why he's here at all. He should not stand trial. One man said that wasn't the case, calling Mark a malingerer, meaning someone pretending to be mentally unwell. That same man decades later changed his mind. That didn't help the 20-year-old Mark, who was sent back to jail. There he made another gun, an improved version of his last zip gun, even though for this one he had to use an empty roll of toothpaste. "I was in my gunsmith phase, I could make a gun out of anything," Mark would later recall. This time he threatened the guards, and just to make sure the gun was working, he fired it at a wall. It was working alright, and many other inmates saw that Mark had not shot anywhere near the guards. But enough was enough. The guards beat Mark within an inch of his life and forced him into a pitch-black cell, naked, bruised, and broken. After 11 days of that, he took a plea deal without really knowing what a plea deal was. For firing at the wall, he was convicted of attempted murder. Later, he was sent to the Florida State Prison, a prison that at the time was said to be totally ungovernable, a prison where violence and murder was commonplace. No inmate in the US ever wanted to end up there. It confined the so-called worst of the worst, but as prisons go, it was the worst of the worst. Mark was still occasionally unruly. He still didn't really understand the prison system or the prison code, and he was beaten severely by both guards and inmates on many occasions, and so he started making homemade weapons. When they were found, he went back into the hole. His solitary confinement was often a life of total isolation. The order given by the prison authorities was no clothes for the prisoner, no mattress or sheets. Conversation with anyone was prohibited, which included prison trustees. He was given no toiletries, no tissues, no toothpaste, no soap. They turned off the water in his cell at times and he couldn't even flush the toilet.
He had to eat with his hands and in the total darkness. The torture and humiliation was later compared to what happened at Guantanamo Bay. He had to live in silence and darkness, naked, like a trapped animal. And if that's not cruel and unusual punishment, then what is? His punishment was nothing short of medieval, and arguably a form of modern-day torture. The prison put him on a consolidated security list, so when he wasn't in total darkness, he still wasn't allowed out of his cell. In his own words, he said, "You can go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years without ever seeing the yard." In total, he had 10 years of requests to see the sun, and they were all denied. But he still caught sight of the guards, and what he would do is study their keys. After examining them, he'd memorize the cuts in the keys and then make his own set out of paper. "I made keys for every lock in America," he said many years later. Did he ever get to use them? Well, Mark attempted to escape 13 times in all, and he was successful 7 times. One time he scaled the fence and broke both his feet. He somehow managed to hotwire a truck, ram a police roadblock, and then after a high-speed chase, ended up driving the truck into someone's living room. They were really upset, he later said, about the people whose house he'd driven into. He had hundreds of disciplinary reports, but he's never hurt anyone else. They were usually for minor infractions, or for being found with weapons he was keeping to protect himself in the ultra-violent places where he was housed. His story became public, and the majority of the public now say that this is a man who has some mental issues, who's been chewed up by the prison system right from the first year when he was brutally beaten and sexually abused by a gang of inmates. He was paroled on February 5, 2019 on the condition that he spend a year in a mental health and substance abuse center. Over the years, he developed dependencies on the many drugs he received in prison. After only a few days, he started showing signs of bipolar mania, and his kidneys were failing him. He also tested positive for methamphetamine. Mark was subsequently sent back to jail, and from what we can now see, he is waiting to see which prison he'll be sent to. It's now 40 years since he drove off with his deceased father's tools. 27 of those years he spent in solitary confinement, either with the absence of the sun or in total darkness. Alcatraz Island, where the notorious prison was based, is located about 1¼ miles off San Francisco Bay. It started as a home to a lighthouse, became a military base, and then a military prison in the 19th century, before becoming the location of one of America's most talked about lockups in 1934 that lasted until 1963. This small island, measuring just 1,675 feet by 590 feet, is still home to a prison today, but only as a kind of somber museum. Known as The Rock, it housed some of the U.S.'s most dangerous criminals. It was said no one could ever escape this island, but history tells us 2 men may have, or they may have died in the water. Many others have tried and failed. Al Capone. When it comes to names associated with the Italian Mafia, perhaps Al Capone is the name most people remember. You may have seen him depicted in numerous movies and TV shows, and if you have, you'll know he seemed to have a very light and very dark side. He robbed from the rich and sometimes gave to the poor. He also killed and ordered killed many people. It seems he had a very fiery temper at times. He was also behind the St. Valentine's Day massacre, and after this he became more of a reviled figure. He was first jailed in 1929 for carrying deadly weapons, but the sentence was a short one. But in 1931 he was charged with tax evasion and prohibition charges, and after a stint in jail he ended up in Alcatraz. He was released in 1939, but in the ensuing years he suffered many health problems due to complications of syphilis. He lost his mind and died in 1947. James Whitey Bulger. From Italian-American gangster to an Irish-American gangster, and someone who again had been depicted in films and TV shows. Not surprisingly, he too was said to have a very short temper, and sometimes a lust for blood. He ruled with an iron fist, but was also an FBI informant. For this, well, likely for this, he was beaten to death as an old man while in prison in 2018. Was he dangerous? Very much so. And while he was only charged with 11 murders, there are those that say he killed and ordered killed scores of people. He was imprisoned in Alcatraz many years before his downfall. In 1959, he had served time in an Atlanta prison before that. That was for old-school type bank robberies, and he got 20 years. That sentence was reduced when it was discovered that he had taken part in the not-so-ethical MKUltra LSD trials. It said he read classics and mostly kept his head down, but escape was never far away in his mind. He was one of the friends of the men that maybe did escape, and he believed all his life that they got away.
He once wrote, "The morning of the escape was one of the happiest moments of my life. I can still remember it as if it were yesterday." 1 month after their escape, he left the island and served another 3 years in another prison and was released in 1965. He would go on to become a much more prolific and vicious criminal, and in the 90s, one of the biggest manhunts ever was conducted in his name. He evaded arrest for 16 years, and you know what happened to him in his aging years while in prison. Robert Stroud. You might better know this man as the Birdman of Alcatraz. While U.S. authorities called him one of the most dangerous men in the USA, he was hardly as bloodthirsty as the first two guys we've talked about. He was, however, a career criminal and was diagnosed as a psychopath. He also assaulted fellow prisoners while incarcerated, prison staff, and one time stabbed a prison guard right through the heart with a homemade shiv. The guard died and the authorities had had enough of this violent prisoner. In 1942, he was transferred to Alcatraz, and he would spend at least 6 years of his time in solitary. He died at a medical center while still serving a sentence. They called him the Birdman as he had cared for and raised birds while serving time in prison. Does he deserve to be on this list? Yes, of course, just for the number of people he hurt while in prison. Machine Gun Kelly. No, that's not the name his parents gave him when he was born. This man was christened George Kelly, and as an adult, he became one of the most feared men in America. You can probably guess by his moniker that he had a fondness for using a machine gun, and the FBI once called him an expert machine gunner. His weapon of choice was a Thompson submachine gun. You've all seen one of these things in old gangster movies. It's the gun with a large circular cartridge. In Alcatraz, he was said to be a model prisoner despite what the public thought about him. He was prisoner 117 and spent 17 years at the Rock. He was transferred off Alcatraz in 1951, but died of a heart attack in 1954 while still in prison. He committed many robberies throughout his career, as well as kidnapping, and he had a lot of standoffs with authorities. He was never actually charged with murder, though it's believed he may have committed a few. The FBI seemed to think so. Morton Sobel. This former engineer was by no means a cold-hearted killer. However, he was accused by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover of committing the crime of the century. What did he do? Well, it said he was part of a small group that spied on the US and supplied the Soviet Union with information pertaining to nuclear technology and other military advances in the US. Many said he was innocent, but he was still sentenced to 30 years in 1951 on charges of espionage. He served almost 18 years in total. He stayed at Alcatraz until it closed in 1963 and was said to be a model prisoner. In his 1974 book, On Doing Time, he maintained his innocence, saying his crime had been cooked up for political purposes. In Alcatraz, he even got a room with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge and spent most of his time reading books. Some sources say he got along with fellow prisoners, being a mild man, and also for the fact that he was considered an enemy of the state. Did he really supply the Soviets with information that could have been extremely dangerous to the USA? That's for you to investigate. Alvin "Creepy" Karpis. This gangster in the time of the American Depression got his nickname not because of what he did, but the fact that his friends and associates thought he had a very sinister smile. He gained the accolade of being one of 4 America's public enemy number 1s during the 1930s, when he led the Baker Karpis gang. An interesting fact is that he was the only survivor of so-called public enemy number 1s, as the rest were all killed before they could be in prison. Can you guess who the other 3 were? They were John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, and Babyface Nelson. Karpis also held the number 1 position for the person that spent the most time in Alcatraz, serving 26 years in total. His crimes were many and included robbery, kidnapping, burglary, and murder. It's also said he was incredibly intelligent. He helped Charles Manson learn guitar while serving time in another prison, once describing Manson as a man with a pleasant voice and a pleasing personality, although he's unusually meek and mild for a convict. He never has a harsh word to say and is never involved in even an argument. He went on to write a book after he was released, and it's said that he may have committed suicide while he was writing another book while living in Spain. Others say he more likely accidentally overdosed. Henry Young. This is another case of a man being dangerous not only for what he did on the outside, but for what he did while serving time. Mr. Young was a convicted bank robber who was said to have taken hostages and not always been very nice to them. He spent time in various prisons but ended up in Alcatraz in the 1930s. In 1939, he and 4 others tried to escape, which ended with 2 of the men surrendering, 2 running, 1 shot and killed, and Young also giving himself up. It's said while in Alcatraz he was treated very harshly, spending many years in a small cell all alone. After one stint in solitary, he murdered one of the men he had tried to escape with. His defense said the brutal way he had been treated was partly to blame for the murder. He described what solitary was like, saying, "You have no shoes, no bed, no mattress, nothing but the 4 damp walls and 2 blankets. The walls are painted black. Once a day I got 3 slices of bread. No, that's an error. Some days I got 4 slices." He also said there was no way you could have a bath. He was finally released from another prison in 1972. He jumped parole and was never seen again. John and Clarence Anglin. Okay, so these 2 may not have been that dangerous, but we can't finish the show without talking about them. Why is that? Because these are the guys that supposedly escaped from Alcatraz. The brothers did this along with a 3rd man, Frank Morris. It was a long and meticulous build-up to the escape, with the men taking months to fashion tools that would help them escape through shafts and get out of prison. This took a lot of effort, with the men concealing those tools cleverly and knowing how to hide noise when they were making things. They even stole human hair from the barbershop so that the dummies they left in their beds would look real. For their heads, they used soap that they had stolen and then made to look like a face. But they needed to cross the water, and to do that they built an inflatable raft made partly from stolen raincoats. All were career criminals before their incarceration, with Morris imprisoned for many crimes, mostly related to stealing things. It's also said that he had a very high IQ for a prisoner at 133. The brothers were both bank robbers, but reports say they did their stealing when people were not around, as they never wanted to hurt anyone. They also said that if people were around, they used to only take a toy gun. Nonetheless, they were successful and robbed many big banks, as they were kinda nice guy criminals. Much of the public, when hearing about their escape, are happy they got away. The authorities would like to think all the men died, but there are many people that think they beat the system and found their freedom. Whatever you think, their story has gone down in history.
Now go check out Why Was Everybody Connected to JFK Suddenly Mysteriously Killed? Or watch this instead.